Welcome back. I haven't seen Batman yet. I think that's the reason for this. Anyways, Eileen, tell me what you did last weekend and how it relates to the July 17th event that we were just discussing.
Well, I practice doing this a lot, and no, I'm just kidding. So, last weekend, a whole bunch of student organizers got together at the U of T. The U of T Students' Union did a lot of really amazing solidarity work in organizing basically a conference, a training conference. And a lot of people who had been really active, key organizers in their student associations came and spoke about exactly how their process worked, some of the ramifications of it, some of the reasons for the decisions that they made, and kind of workshopped with people from Ontario to come up with ideas about how to really create better structures of direct democracy with the end goal of mobilizing against tuition hikes, this sort of like gutting of undergraduate education that the provincial government is proposing right now, all this sort of thing. So one of the things that came out of it, there's been a lot of the media right now about how we could never see a student mobilization in Ontario the way that the way like similar to what happened in Quebec, because Quebec has this tradition of general assemblies, like departmental general assemblies, and that this has been like in Quebec since for 40 years, and I learned some interesting stuff that sort of like leads me to question people who take this line without looking more closely at the history of the Quebec student movement, because the Quebec student movement does have a really distinctive history that does come out of the Quiet Revolution, when one of the main issues that people mobilized around was the fact that there was very little French language for secondary education.
Can you say a bit more about what the Quiet Revolution was or is, and its relation to what's going on right now?
Yeah, so the Quiet Revolution happened in Quebec in the 60s, and what it basically was for a long, long time, Quebec had basically been treated as a fiefdom by the Anglo-Canadian, largely Protestant capitalist class. So a lot of the Quebecois proper were French-speaking, had very, very, very poor working conditions, tenuous income, really limited access to any kind of social safety net, and were basically being kept impoverished and were being brutally exploited economically by this sort of the Anglo-capitalist class. So what happened is, I'm not sure exactly how the mobilization happened, because I'm not francophone, so I don't have necessarily all the access to that popular oral history. But I do know for a fact that one of the things that was extremely important to everyone was the idea of creating post-secondary, good quality post-secondary instruction in the French language, because it was very clearly understood that access to education was in fact access to an actual say in the way that the economies in the communities in Quebec were structured.
Right.
So that's why free tuition in Quebec is actually something that is really cherished, because it's always been, or since the Quiet Revolution, it's been generally understood that access to post-secondary education equals social agency.
Yeah.
And that the removal of access to post-secondary agency for particular marginalized demographics, which in the case of these tuition hikes is going to be like the working class and the unemployed class, is, actually a way of divesting these classes, once again, of their agency.
That's right, and this just compounds. I remember speaking with one of the auto workers from CAW Local 27 during the Caterpillar strike, and this was his main concern too. His daughter was in university, and in virtue of losing that position and losing those good union jobs, it affected his family's overall access to education in a place like Ontario, where tuition is much higher. And so these things, they're all related, and that's something that we talked about on the 17th too, is that this isn't a movement about money or any particular amount that people are paying for tuition, but about austerity and what kind of society and culture we want to live in.
Yeah, I think what's really key for all of us who are facing this sort of, divestment of social agency that austerity policies are creating for us is to remember this isn't about balancing a checkbook. This is about codifying and strengthening certain relations of like class, power, and dominance, which is at the end of the day you can link to the broader like consolidation of power in global capitalism, right? So that being said, it's so paralyzing to try to think of a way to take on global capitalism by yourself, besides being a slacktivist sharing links on Facebook.
A slacktivist.
Slacktivist sharing links on Facebook. I've done something today. Not to like, you know, put down people who like come to like educate themselves about stuff in that way, but I mean, I'm saying it's probably not going to be effective in the long run and actually like maybe challenging the structures of class dominance. But anyways, yeah, so the thing that you see, which is I think a key lesson of the Quebec student mobilization, is bringing that stuff back home. Because one of the reasons why our generation is so politically disempowered is that we no longer link our very specific particular conditions to broader political and social and economic conditions. So I think it's really key in terms of organizing to bring back home, like for instance in our context here at Western, that, you know, one of the reasons why we're being told in our contract negotiations that it's impossible to give us a wage, which actually keeps us in, or rather exacerbates the pretty blistering poverty that we already live in. For people who aren't familiar with the London context for TAs, we make $1,100 a month. The average rent, including utilities, is about $650. That leaves $450 a month to pay for everything. I'm talking books, food, any sort of medical bills you have. I mean, there are resources to supplement this, but the bare bones, it's actually nearly, I did it for 1 year and literally lived on potatoes.
So we're going to keep talking about this, but to keep these segments in manageable chunks, I'm going to hit pause and we'll be right back.